Satanic ceremonies occur usually in the middle of the night and take place in barns, churchyards, in heath or woodland. Standard components are child sexual and physical abuse, consumption of body substances, and sexual orgies. Members include lawyers, teachers, clergy, police, politicians, ambassadors, and aristocrats.
The pictures are hammer horror. The words come from a recent textbook for psychotherapists. Yet the lurid fantasy and the learned essay fit together perfectly. The list of dark rites is included in a book which claims that satanic abuse amounts to a wartime atrocity area in peacetime England.
In the book Treating Survivors of Satanist Abuse, I put together about 30 clinicians, all of whom had had 1 or 2 patients alleging Satanist ritual abuse, in which every perversion that we know about is happening in the context of ritualized ceremonies, by which I mean abuse involving children, involving both sexes, involving animals, necrophilia, sex with corpses, drinking of blood, eating of feces, drinking of urine, and in some cases allegations of murder and cannibalism.
American therapists and their clients began to trade stories of satanic abuse in the early 80s. Before long, British therapists had joined the witch hunt. Here, too, children were said to be preyed on by a secret network of murderous devil worshippers. Gothic horrors like these are still thought by many psychotherapists to be actually happening in the real world. Only in these strange days, when reason and evidence are swept away by credulity and delusions, could the therapists and their preposterous stories have received such an awestruck hearing. Without our unthinking regard for therapists, the satanic scare could never have happened. From Kent to the Orkney Islands, social workers were prompted by therapists to act on allegations which went further than anything heard in 17th century witch trials.
Parents in the Orkney Islands have demanded the immediate return of 9 children taken into care after allegations of ritual sex abuse. The call came after a public meeting.
Only after hysteria had led to catastrophe, with families broken up and children taken into care, did the government commission a report to see if there was any foundation to the claims of organised satanic abuse.
What I did was look at all the cases I could find for a 4-year period in the whole of England and Wales, and to look at some of those cases in very great depth. And using those 2 different methods, I could find no evidence that there had been secret cult activity in any of the cases, and nor could I find evidence that there had been human sacrifice, cannibalism, or perverted sexual orgies.
When her report was published, many therapists were so committed to their beliefs they refused to accept its conclusions.
My book came out deliberately timed to come out around the same time as Gina Fontaine's report, because I wanted survivors to know that there were clinicians that were saying they did exist. To be a survivor of something that nobody thinks exists is to be an invisible refugee. And one reason for writing the book was a patient saying, "When I watch the news of Bosnia, I feel awful for those people, but at least everybody knows where they come from. When I tell police or social services what's happened to me, nobody believes me."
There are grounds for such disbelief. There was certainly a war in Bosnia, but organised satanic abuse is no more than a myth, a nasty fairy tale. It is belief, not disbelief in this myth, which has damaged people. Earlier this year, families in the Orkneys received compensation for the misery they had endured. The police have found nothing, anywhere, suggesting that organised satanic abuse exists. But therapists have insisted that this only illustrates the devilish cleverness of the perpetrators. Everybody but the therapists is in denial.
Therapists have spread the idea of satanic abuse as a new condition that they have to be aware of. I have myself been present at many occasions when presentations have been given of satanic abuse and the means of diagnosing it and how to treat it. And it seems perfectly clear to me that a large proportion of those who were listening were convinced and would start looking for it. In so doing, I think they created more evidence, and in their conferences and in their papers, they spread the information about, so that before very long there was a stone had been cast in the pool, so to speak, and the ripples were spreading very fast in all directions.
But why were these ripples allowed to cause such grief and havoc? Why were social workers, journalists, even the courts so ready to believe tales of homicidal cults whose eminent members ate babies and drank blood? Well, because they trusted the tellers of these tales. They deferred to the therapists. These self-appointed specialists in the soul are now more respected than doctors, more reverenced than priests. One man created them all, Sigmund Freud, the messiah of the mind doctors.
I discovered some important new facts about the unconscious in psychic life.
Freud considered himself a scientist and modestly compared his theory of the unconscious to the discovery that the Earth is not the centre of the universe. He believed that the causes of present misery lie in the infantile past and are hidden in the unconscious, where they can only be detected using his patent technique. This was psychoanalysis, the talking cure, the start of a century of therapy.
Carl Gustav Jung, born in 1875, with Freud, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology.
By 1959, when Jung made this sage-like appearance on Face to Face, psychoanalysis had become a flourishing, secular religion, offering its devotees confession, absolution, and a set of seemingly irrefutable truths about human nature.
We need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself.
For sophisticated 20th century patients, psychotherapy provided a neat, modern way to blame others for their misfortunes. Instead of accusing demons or sorcerers, they could put the blame on their parents, on traumatic events, on shadowy forces beyond their control.
We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied.
Since Jung issued this injunction, we have acquired an entire ministry of mind doctors. Man's psyche is now being studied by 250,000 therapists and their clients. Already psychotherapists outnumber Church of England priests. Here, at Westminster Pastoral Foundation, teachers and novices prepare for the task ahead.
Well, I think it's a natural instinct in humans to want to help other people. We live in groups. And maybe perhaps the jury is still out on whether therapy is a method of treatment or a path of human development. And I think, personally, I needed to grow.
I think that therapy and counselling have become almost the sort of dominant mode of understanding today. I can't explain that. It's merely perhaps that there's a vacuum, and that this way of thinking has become almost the spirit of the age.
The missionaries of therapy are omnipresent, proclaiming their belief that if we can only confront the causes of our unhappiness will cease. Such is popular faith in their wisdom that therapists have become our pet gurus, all-purpose experts, always on hand with an instant analysis. The Carlings fall out, send for the mind doctor. Divorce rates rise, bring on the therapist. The idea that it's good to talk isn't just a sales pitch, it's holy writ. It's good to talk even if you're a princess and half the country is watching.
Maybe I was the first person ever to be in this family who ever had a depression or was ever openly tearful. And obviously that was daunting, because if you've never seen it before, how do you support it? When no one listens to you, or you feel no one's listening to you, all sorts of things start to happen. For instance, you have so much pain inside yourself that you try and hurt yourself on the outside because you want help, but it's the wrong help you're asking for. I don't think I've been given any credit for growth. And my goodness, I've had to grow.
Well, we all have to grow sometime, but does it help to tell everybody? Only a culture of confession could have applauded this public revelation of bulimia, self-mutilation and marital civil war.
I don't feel blame. I mean,
But therapists are not content with teaching the royal family the art of psychobabble. They want more than prestige.
Well, actually, men and women of power have always had a need to surround themselves with reflective individuals. I mean, it's part of the apparatus of a Machiavellian court, for example. I mean, it could even be Machiavelli's self-conception, is to be the reflective philosopher figure in the court. And I think that religious personages have carried that burden up until quite recently. There's now a sort of vacuum in that area. Who are the reflective figures at the court of Tony Blair?
Well, it's a good question.
Let me give you a sort of simple illustration. Say there's a committee meeting to discuss a policy. It could be housing, or it could be economics, it could be international conflict, something like that. Such a committee would want to have a number cruncher, somebody who knew about computers, who knew about statistics, who knew about money, if you like, and you could see that person as being at one end of a spectrum of experts. The psychotherapist or psychological commentator should also be there, in my view, at the other end of a spectrum of experts, and that's what I'm trying to achieve in my work.
I wonder why you love me, baby. I hardly love myself at all. I think we're both a little crazy. We need some therapy, that's all.
But not so fast. Which kind of therapy do we need? The more psychotherapy has acquired influence and respectability, the more it has fragmented. Freud's talking treatment has become a Tower of Babel, a chaos of rival versions of the healing process. Can they all be right? Could they all be wrong?
It's not our fault we have this problem. Our parents made us, we were had. There are over 400 schools of psychotherapy, according to some counts, certainly in the Western world, that we know about. Now, that's obviously far too many. There cannot be 400 different types of things that we do with human beings. A lot of them are the same thing in a different packaging. Just the same way there may be, I don't know how many genuinely different washing powders there are. I know there are lots of packages.
With so much choice, you might expect some consumer protection, but there's nothing to stop your therapist being ignorant, inept, or downright insane. Anyone can set up as a counsellor. If you wanted to impress, you could join the British Association for Counselling. It's not difficult. You just need £50 and a stamp. So now I'm in business. I'm a BAC associate member and ready to start counselling. I've got my couch, my box of Kleenex, and an ad in Time Out. I've already had a few enquiries. All I need to do now is set a fee. Does £30 an hour seem reasonable? And pick a counselling style. Will it be existential or transactional, primal or integrative? Or shall I just make it up as I draw out my clients' intimate problems and listen to their secrets? There was nothing to stop me making money from counselling, but I didn't take it up. Few things are more boring than listening to other people's dreams. But some therapists seem to get a kick out of it. Psychotherapy provides unlimited opportunities for the strong to exploit the vulnerable. Judith went into biodynamic therapy 3 years ago. This involved breathing exercises, a male therapist, and a lot of therapeutic touching.
Well, it seemed like from the very first session he was very intent on making me work nude or without my clothes. And he really did seemed to take over in sessions in a way that was very manipulative and very strange. He'd shout at me, he'd get angry with me, and then the next minute he'd be very calm and friendly. I got really most upset in the last but one session when he got me to stand up, and I was quite close to him. And he began saying, tugging at my knickers, saying, well, take these off, go on, take these off. And I said, why are you doing that? And he said, oh, it's a little devil in me. You know, it just suddenly became crystal clear. I should have run out of there the very first session, but it was like, if you complained, it was like he was saying, oh, well, this is just resistance. It's very difficult to take on what really is happening, because there's a part of you that is so needy that you're prepared to put up with almost anything.
There are some efforts to impose discipline. The Council for Psychotherapy now publishes this register, but it's voluntary. Many therapists oppose compulsory regulation, arguing that it would be elitist. They're right, of course. Unscrupulous therapists would be thrown out. In the world of I'm okay, you're okay, this would obviously cause problems. Trying to recover from harmful therapy, Judith now does more therapy with this group of women whose therapist seemed fixated on the pleasure principle.
My therapist got me to take my clothes off in front of the group. He felt it was therapy because he thought by making me face the group I would confront my embarrassment about being naked in front of a group. Now for me that was actually further abuse. But there's a fine line between abuse and reliving your previous traumatic experiences. I was so vulnerable, I felt pressured, and it wasn't right.
He should have checked it out with you.
He should have checked it out with me, and he just thought, this is not, you know, he likes nice dramatic things. He thinks the more naked, the more extreme, the more physical, and the deeper it is, the more profound the therapy is.
So therapy can make you worse, but can it make you better? A third of GP surgeries now offer counselling, and most patients like it. After all, sympathetic attention is always nice. But researchers have yet to prove that psychotherapy is actually therapeutic. No one model seems to work better than any other, says this study. And the personality of the therapist turns out to be more important than any training they may have. Is psychotherapy better than standard GP treatment? No, say several studies. Should a health service be spending money on psychotherapy? Not if they've got any sense, says this one. We shouldn't be surprised by this lack of supporting evidence. Freud himself never let absence of proof or inconvenient data stand in the way of an impressive theory.
What Freud set out to do was, I think, to find cures for various mental illnesses which he had decided had an emotional cause. And so what he ended up by doing, and this is one of the great problems of psychoanalysis and one of the problems in the legacy that has come down to us, what he ended up by doing was creating a vast speculative model of the mind that he thought was there. It was not based on observation. It was not based on any kind of, it was based to a degree, it was extrapolated from contemporary neurophysiology. But that was so primitive that in the end Freud had to make it up as he went along.
Of all Freud's inventions, his concept of repression has probably done the most damage. Freud said repression was the cornerstone on which the whole structure of psychoanalysis rested. The theory holds that the mind can protect itself from painful experiences in childhood by pushing them into the unconscious, where they can cause psychological problems in later life.
Freud was the first person to delineate the idea of repression as a psychoanalytic concept. What he said nearly 100 years ago was that if something unbearable happened for us to remember, we couldn't run away in the way that if we're faced with a fire or a frightening outside experience, we can run away or we can fight it. But if the frightening thing is something inside our own mind, the way of running away from it, unfortunately, takes on a different function in that we get rid of a piece of our mind.
But where is the evidence that the mind behaves like this?
Studies that have tried to show that repression works have simply come up blank. And if you look in a modern textbook of human memory, there you will not find a chapter on repression. You may find it in the index as a historical footnote. But more recently, there have been reviews going back over 60 years, looking at every study that's been done in an attempt to find even one case where traumatic experience has been followed by amnesia, and then followed by someone remembering that it's happened, so that you could say it's repressed and not caused by brain damage, for example. All of these studies have simply failed to come up with convincing evidence, and most experimental psychologists don't believe it.
Therapists don't know the literature. They are simply unversed in the vast amount of psychological literature in the area of memory. One very simple example would suffice. It is well known in psychology that we have no memories for the first 3 years of life, and this phenomenon is called infantile amnesia. The explanation is that the brain is quite simply not sufficiently mature at this stage for permanent traces to be laid down. And yet, one will hear on countless occasions of analysts retrieving memories from before the age of 3, memories which they say have been repressed.
Yet far
uniform, while you watched other men bugger me.
Like the Satanic scare, the recovered memory crusade began in America. Since 1988, an estimated 1 million American adults claim to have recovered, in therapy, memories of being sexually abused in childhood, memories they had somehow forgotten in the interim. Their accusations have led to criminal damages and prison sentences. Like the Satanic scare, the recovered memory movement owes more to conviction and ideology than to evidence. According to The Courage to Heal, the best-selling manual of the movement, you don't even need to remember anything. If you think you were abused, say the authors, and your life shows the symptoms, then you were. It's like saying that if you think you're Napoleon and you wear a funny hat, then you are. These symptoms are hardly unusual. They cover everything from overeating to underachieving.
We have a very radical feminist movement, and to which I like to think I belong. But the radical wing insists that whatever victims, that is women and children, say must be believed literally. And this is sometimes very difficult, but it has led to credence being placed on the most bizarre statements.
The recovered memory movement is still advancing, rippling through workshops and seminars. At a recent conference in Sheffield, therapists and social workers seem to be more interested in accepting their patients' tales of abuse than in verifying them.
Where abuse is concerned, there is an even more painful polarity over right and wrong, because often it's one person's word against another with no outside witness, but the kind of waiting for medical evidence as this wonderful final proof is only available for a small number of cases. If someone comes saying they've been bedwetting, you don't send out a forensic expert to check the sheets.
But if necessary, sheets can be checked, can't they? Unlike recovered memories. And is Sinison suggesting that child abuse is as common as bedwetting? In the forefront of the British recovered memory movement is the well-known astrologer and former Jungian therapist Marjorie Orr. To her, repression is beyond doubt.
If you think of all of our responses to the West case, we could not think about it. There was a point at which the mind just plain switched off because it was too horrible. If you're actually involved in that kind of thing, if you're on the receiving end of that, think what it does to your mind. I mean, are you expected to be able to remember what other people can't even think about? You know, you blank it out. The mind has to survive.
I myself walked in one day when Mum was in bed with another man, and even though I knew it, it was still a shock to me. And I shut the door quickly and went down in the basement and sat down there crying because I couldn't believe what I saw. And Dad came down and threatened to hit me if I ever went in there again.
The children of Fred West did not, it seems, blank out their experiences. No one now doubts that some children are abused, but this disturbing fact cannot justify the therapist's claims for repression, for which there remains no evidence.
There is, in fact, counter-evidence. The evidence, of course, being in the form of the far more familiar and respected diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, people who do endure crises, be they sexual assaults, rapes, tube disasters, football disasters, the Holocaust and so forth. I mean, these people cannot get these memories out of their minds. I mean, their lament would be if only there was such a thing as repression. They are haunted by these memories.
In fact, the concepts of repression and recovered memories are no more plausible than superstitious fancies such as clairvoyance, crystal gazing and astrology. Marjorie Orr has a regular horoscope column in the Express and a phone-in soothsaying service.
This is Marjorie Orr with your astrological prospects for Leo for Wednesday the 6th, Thursday...
If your mind is open enough to believe that remote planets influence human behaviour, you can probably find room for recovered memories as well. You did say that you don't like to just take things on faith, and that, you know, it's evidence that's convinced you of recovered memory rather than just a belief system. And yet, surely believing that the stars will, you know, have an effect on human life is the absolute leap of faith.
Well, I don't think this is quite the place to get into a very long argument about astrology, but in fact I have done a major survey this year of the birth charts of child abusers and abuse victims and come up with some very interesting material, but it's mainly of interest to technical astrologers.
But there are signs on a chart that might indicate to you abuse one way or the other.
I would never use it as a diagnostic tool, no. But it will tell you about the psychology of people and the psychology of abuse survivors, and in a different way, the psychology of abusers, which isn't all, you know, they're not all the same people. I mean, there's a wide range of human behaviour, but yes, I mean, there are signs.
The onward march of therapy does not mean that therapy works. It merely confirms that we are in retreat from rationality. And where there is no regard for reason and evidence, there can be no justice. For the specialists in recovered memory, the couch is a court where elements of unproven Freudian speculation are used as forensic tools to convict parents of equally unproven crimes. Like the harmless women who were once arraigned as witches, those suddenly accused of abusing their children can never establish their innocence. They sink or they swim. Either way, they are lost. Joe and Sheila Skitt have a small family, one married daughter and 2 grandchildren. They were still close when their daughter began to see a therapist for what seemed to be postnatal depression. One day, after 4 years of this therapy, the Skitt family fell apart.
In March 2 years ago, our son-in-law came to see us and told us that our daughter was saying in therapy that we had abused her mentally, physically and sexually.
And one of the major parts of it was that we apparently were involved in a ring that controlled children with hypnosis and code words. We apparently could turn them on and off, which sounds science fiction-y, but that's the major accusation as I know it. Nobody will be precise about the accusations, and I wish I could tell you more. But I've got the impression that we're also been accused of satanic abuse, for instance.
My daughter refuses to acknowledge us. We write to her on a fairly regular basis. We send the children Christmas cards, birthday cards, Easter cards. We put money in them for presents. We don't even know if they get them. She just does not acknowledge that we exist anymore.
I want to scream out to the world to know that it's not true. That's why I've told all my... I've never hidden from the day one. We've never hidden a word from day one, and I won't hide a word. It's not true, and to know that it's not true, but not to get my daughter to know that it's not true,
It's such a feeling of utter despair. I've cried and cried and cried, and for me, that's an admission I would never. I can hardly believe I'm saying it.
Freud said his aim was to turn hysterical misery into common unhappiness. It is the achievement of his followers that therapy can now do the opposite, transforming common unhappiness into misery.